Welcome, everybody. This is Maria Garcia Nielsen. Welcome to our November 5th call. First things first, we hope everybody that is able to vote has voted, and we do apologize for hoping not having interfered with your voting privilege in the U.S. election. I'm calling in from Madrid today, but I am a U.S. citizen and I have already voted. But I know Melinda and I were a little bit concerned that, this might interfere with your voting privilege. So, apologize for that. We have a full house today. Lots of people signed up for this call, about, over 100 and I think 30 people. I'm taking care of the back office, and I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for your continued support. We still haven't broken the 1,000. We are about 971 people in our distribution list and 781 individuals in our closed LinkedIn group. Just as a reminder, in our closed LinkedIn group, you can post information. It's only for us. And Melinda has been kind enough to be working with Angels and posting some board roles as well. So as far as back office, please mute yourself for the first few minutes of the call. Melinda is going to be speaking to our guests. I won't disclose yet, as Melinda is going to introduce her. And then we will open up for questions. And hopefully, if you submitted a question and you remember it, please put it in the chat and we'll call on you. And with that, I'll highlight Melinda, I'll spotlight her. That's what it's called. And there you go.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those of you still on the West Coast. Yes, thank you, Maria. A reminder, please get out and vote if you haven't voted earlier today. And we're very excited to welcome today to our monthly call, Julie Daum, Wharton MBA 97, I believe a finance major, and the leader of the North American board practice at Spencer Stuart, one of the preeminent recruiting firms with a really great platform in corporate governance and board advisory. So welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
And I do have to say that as much as I would have liked to have graduated in 97, I graduated a little bit before that.
Oh, 79. Sorry, I reversed it, but sorry about that. You look like a 97. That's why.
Absolutely.
So welcome, Julie. And I thought we could just start out today. If you've been with Spencer Stuart for over 30 years, I think that's almost half the history of the firm. So you've obviously been really instrumental in building this incredible practice. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role leading the North American board practice, and a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and whether Wharton was a real driver of your career? A little bit on that.
Well, thank you. I grew up in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh. I went to Penn State, then I went to Wharton. It's as if I never knew that anything existed outside of Pennsylvania. But my first job was with McKinsey in California. So I left. I would say that Wharton had a huge impact on my career. And that opportunity to go to work for McKinsey was extraordinary. And so it was, I'm deeply appreciative of that. I got into what I do in a slightly odd way. I was on a maternity leave. I have 3 daughters, and it was during the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings. And I just felt really strongly that I was about what was happening in that and what was happening to women. And I hadn't really thought about the issue when I was in business school or afterwards. I mean, there were no women, but it was like we were all kind of used to, that's all we knew at the time. And watching that, I was just horrified. And I thought, I don't want this world for my daughters. And so I was on a maternity leave, and I went to work for part-time for Catalyst, which is an organization that was created to help get women into the business world. one of the things that we did that year was to start a census of how many women were actually on corporate boards. It was 3.6%. And start to talk to CEOs about the importance of having women in the room. And so that was how I started really getting into board recruiting. So I would go and talk to CEOs about the importance of women, and they would say, that's terrific, but there are no women. And my response had to be, no, there are. What are you looking for? Let me introduce you to 3 women who look like that. And from there, I went to Spencer Stuart. So I never thought this would be my career, but that's what happened. I was really fortunate to work with a man who at Spencer Stuart was kind of the dean of executive search. And he worked with boards on CEO and board recruiting. And he brought me to all the meetings, and he would turn to me and he would say, Julie, tell the CEO why it's important to have women on your board. And so that was how I started. And I've been at Spencer Stuart for 31 years. I've run our board practice for 20 some, I don't know. I spent 20% of my time doing work in governance, really studying governance, trying to figure out what's happened last year, what's happening next year, where are the trends, what should boards expect to be thinking about. And then I spend 80% of my time recruiting directors. So Wharton put me on this path in a way.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about, you've been really formative in this board practice. What accomplishments at Spencer Stuart would you say you're most proud of over the course of this very impressive career?
Well, I mean, I do recruit men, so I don't want it to sound like this, but we have recruited 3,800 women and 1,700 people from underrepresented groups to boards. And that was from the beginning of nothing. And so I think we really built the ability to do that and to recruit, to really identify people who were up and coming or were already there, and act as a representative in a way to them into rooms where they would never have been known. And in the past, as in the present, still a lot of board recruiting is directors looking around and saying, does anybody know anybody who looks like X? So we really had to introduce people who they did not know into it. So really putting together a structure of recruiting and identifying people in that. So that's probably the thing I'm most proud of. But I do think that we have been really a player in the boardroom during the financial crisis. We worked with, Freddie, Fannie, Citi, General Motors, Chrysler. Like I think are the go-to group for, when you have a governance issue also. So that would be, I think we've built a significant practice based on facts, based on understanding governance, and based on understanding the candidate pools.
Great. Yeah, I have to say from our perspective, it's definitely clear that, Spencer Stuart and some of the other big recruiting firms are really leading in professionalizing board practice and corporate governance. So it's great to see that you've had such a profound impact there.
Thank you.
Let's turn our attention to this, the Spencer Stuart Board Index, which I understand it's in its 39th year now. So it's a survey of S&P 500 companies, what's going on with their boards and their leadership teams. And, it's really pretty remarkable to have that kind of longitudinal view. So we really appreciate the work. I thought we could stroll through, and we'll post all this for all the participants. We'll post the board survey, and as well as a couple of really helpful pieces that Spencer Stuart has published about how to find board seats and what the process is like. So, but let's focus on a couple of the interesting tidbits from this report. The first area I wanted to broach was the board refreshment and process and tenure policies. So the report says that the pace of S&P 500 company board refreshment has been stable at around 7 or 8% for the last 5 years. And the report qualifies that as being low. So I was hoping you could share with us whether you think that pace is slower than optimal, and whether you have an idea in mind about what would be a better pace of board refreshment to increase the effectiveness of corporate boards.
So I'll start with a stat that we do surveys of non-gov chairs and CEOs, and that is part of our process. And this year was no different. And one of the things that was interesting is that we all know the world is changing very quickly, faster than we've seen. But if you ask CEOs, do you have the board that you need given what's going on? Many of them say there are several directors that they really, don't think are contributing. If you ask non-gov chairs, what do you think? Do you have the board you need? You'd be surprised how many of them say no. They don't. And there is a reason for that, and that it comes up with this issue of board turnover. In most years, I just don't think people understand this, but I'll just use the SSBI because we have been doing this study for 38 years. Only in a given year, only 7 to 8% of board seats turnover. So this year, 217 boards did not have a new director. And so the reason for that is that boards in the US, excuse me, have had, tend to use age as their methodology for turnover. So and the age goes up every year, the age they set goes up. So right now it's, about a little bit over 75. So what it means is a director could stay until they hit that age. They could have been on the board for 30 years. It doesn't matter. They can stay until they're 75. If you look in the UK, for example, they use board tenure. So you can have 3-3-year terms or stay 9 years. And after that, you're no longer independent. So it's very different there. People turn after 9 years. Here, we don't have a lot of turnover. So 7-8% of board seats turnover. Boards tend to wait till somebody hits that 75 age, or maybe a year or two before. But they don't assess directors. I'm so sorry. Every year, they do a board assessment of the whole group, but they do not assess individuals. So they rely on this, people hitting retirement age. There are some boards that use board tenure. There's not a lot. I think there's 43 of them this year. But the tenure tends to be 15 years. That tends to be what they use, which again is longer than you'll see in other countries. So you have boards don't have a lot of new people coming into the room.
So you talked a bit about tenure and age. And it seems like, as you mentioned, on the international front, we see more moves to try to limit tenure and age. But when we look at the US, I think, even if there is a tenure policy or an age policy, most of the time we come in under that. So even with that, is that really like the optimal driver of board refreshment, or is it just sort of a safety measure?
I think it's a measure that's unemotional and easy. But all of us would say that people who are 75 whose wisdom is incredible. Like they've seen so much that for a CEO, that person might really be invaluable. And people who are younger who are not contributing as much. So I mean, it's really hard to use age or tenure is a kind of a proxy for whether somebody should be in the room. What boards should be doing is, assessing, just like all of us get assessed at our job every year. Boards do not. And so, it is the part of the reason for the issue is that it is a group of equals. There is no one who is, like in charge of this group, if you will. And so that's hard. It makes it harder. It's that you are going to be judging people who you really are a unit, and a social and a business group. So it's hard. I think boards find it really hard to do that and to have those kind of honest conversations. And so it's easy to use an unemotional age or tenure policy. But as I said, the world is moving quickly, and for people to stay relevant or, be useful, not everybody ages the same way. Not everybody's experience stays relevant. Like if you're a technologist, but you retired 10 years ago, you probably aren't relevant. If you are a financial expert and you retired 10 years ago, you probably are, right? Your skills are valuable. And if you've been on another board and chaired an audit committee, that's okay. So it's just hard to generalize.
Got it. Well, you mentioned the board assessment process, and it definitely seems like over the last few years, there's been a real increase in the number of companies using some kind of board assessment process.
Right.
I think the report mentioned that 99% of S&P 500 companies are doing some kind of evaluation process. But Spencer,
that's of the board. That's of the whole board.
Of the whole board, right. So what I was going to say is that what Spencer Stuart is recommending is best practice is that that there be an individual director evaluation process, which includes 360s with management and peer evaluations every 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And I'm wondering, I also noticed that that in the report, it says 28%, only 28% of S&P 500 boards are working with third parties for their board assessment process. So I was wondering if you had any idea, anecdotally, how many of the S&P 500 or large cap universe are following what you think is best practice and, where the room for improvement is.
Yeah, I couldn't give you that. The stat of the 28% is probably low because you don't have to report this. You have to report whether you have a board evaluation as a whole, but you don't have to report whether you have individuals. So it's hard to know what that number is. But it's still a low number that are doing individuals, but it is something I think most boards are starting to talk about. Partly because there is this slow change and a dynamic world. And I think most people are starting to realize they've got to have some kind of methodology in order to have turnover. But not every, but it's not even a majority. There's no way it's a majority of boards doing it. It's, third
Doing
or so.
the individual director.
Individual. Yeah.
So progress to make there. And it also seems like that might go hand in hand with a third party because it is emotional. And it seems like it might be easier to bring in outside expertise to run the process, at least for purposes of making it a little easier to digest emotionally.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's really true because it is hard to look at somebody who you've sat next to for 5 years, and do that as an equal, right? Versus as as somebody they report to.
Do you think combining that kind of process, the individual director evaluation with using a skill matrix is useful to, really getting a more functional board refreshment process in place?
I think so. If you do it right, it's the matrix is a funny thing. Most boards now put their matrix in their proxy. But you'll see some boards that have every director checks every box, which is of course not true. And, I remember looking years ago, Coca-Cola was one of the first to put this in, and it was beautiful. And then you looked and you said, there is no way George Mitchell is the former senator, is a consumer expert, a financial expert, and technology. It's like everybody on the board checked every box. So, it's what you do with that matters, right? And so it's not necessarily what you report. It's whether, and we talk with boards to say, do not let every director check every box, make them pick the 4 things they think they're best at, or do Harvey balls, where you say, in technology, do you think you are, an expert, part expert, kind of like give yourself a percentage ranking in there. So that you can say, well, I have some exposure, but I'm not an expert compared to the CTO of, Google or something. So we're trying to get talking to boards and, about being honest about that, their assessment of their contribution to the room.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about the new director class. So Spencer Stuart in the report breaks down new directors into a couple of categories. It's active CEOs, retired CEOs, financial background, and other C-suite. And as usual, active and retired CEOs are a large significant portion. And, anecdotally, we all know that, that's a desirable skill set, CEO for board searches. Do you think people with CEO experience are overrepresented in when companies are looking for new directors?
I think they have, well, when I first started, they were the only candidates. But I think right now they're underrepresented, which is a funny thing to say. But, the world has changed and CEOs are not allowed to serve on, they can serve on one outside board if their board allows them. If they serve on more than that, then their investors will vote against them. So CEOs are reluctant to take on a board and very, very choosy about the board they take if they do, because they know they're allowed to have one. Their job is also really hard, and so I think a lot of them don't feel they have the time, the capacity to take on another job, basically. So you see fewer CEOs in the room than you used to. And then when you look at the past couple of years, there have been very few CEOs coming into the room. There's been a real push for diversity, and as we all know, there are not women and there are not people from underrepresented groups in those CEO ranks. So I think boards right now feel a little bit like they're catching up, because if they do have a CEO on the board, they tend to be retired. And so right now there is a real push for getting people who are active, who are not retired, who are competing in this world, and bringing in some more CEO expertise, because I think a lot of CEOs don't have that in the room and feel like they need it. They need someone they can talk to about, you've sat here, what this is, well, what would you do? So believe it or not, CEOs are not overrepresented in the room. They may be underrepresented. Financial experts, it's a little bit different. A board has to have a financial expert. Many boards feel like they have to have several. And if your financial expert retires, you need to replace them with another financial expert. So there's always a steady stream of interest in that category. But the CEO one, I think, is a reaction to the fact there aren't very many. There haven't been very many coming in, and the complexity of the world we're dealing with.
Got it. And the report noted also a pretty big increase in recent years in new board members with a financial background, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about, what is driving that? Is part of it related to a search for diversity? Is it that the world is so much more complex? What are the drivers?
I don't know. One thing I speculate is that, it wasn't until Sarbanes that we had to have a financial expert on the board. And so I think we're probably seeing a lot of people retire who came on as a result of that. So that's one thing. And I just, not everybody wants to chair an audit committee. You don't have to be a financial expert to chair an audit committee, but, I think most boards would like a financial expert to chair. If you have somebody who's been chairing your audit committee for, 5-8 years, they may not want to continue to do it. They may not mind being on it, but they would like to not chair it. So they would like somebody else on the board who has a financial background. So we don't know exactly why, but I think it's just that there's always a need. Both legally, there's a need, and so to have, as I said, somebody on the board who's a financial expert, not necessarily chair, And some boards really want everybody on their audit committee to be a financial expert. So it's just a background that's valuable.
Good to know, and good for Wharton, I think.
Good for Wharton. Yes, good for Wharton.
I noticed also that for new directors with a finance background, that increase is largely driven by people with chief financial officer experience. Have you noticed this, anecdotally, when you talk to companies? Is there a hard preference for CFOs with, C-suite experience versus people with an investment banking or an investment management background?
Yeah.
One of the things that I worry about with this trend is that CFO, like CEO, there are less diverse candidates making it into the C-suite and into those prime seats. Right. I think that maybe if there were more buy side and sell side candidates for board directors, maybe that would allow us to keep on increasing the pace of inclusion in diversity in the boardroom.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think most boards, when they think about a financial expert, for their first one at least, they really do want somebody who's been is or has been a CFO. That person obviously has all the credentials they need, but they've also supported an audit committee, and they've been in the boardroom. They've been in their own boardroom. And so that experience is very valuable also. They know what makes a good director. They know what makes a director who's just annoying and asking the wrong questions and of management. So, I think they do make the perfect director because they bring operating experience, they bring audit board experience, then they bring the financial experience. There is a feeling that people coming with different other backgrounds may be financially sophisticated, but that's different than being, a senior member of a public company management team. And yes, they can learn the accounting and all of that clearly, but it's some of the other things that they don't have.
Got it. So focus on the C-suite, running the company, really hands-on with operating experience, basically.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about CEO trends. So in the report, progress towards getting diversity in the C-suite in the upper echelons of companies, it's slow. So we only have 20 more female CEOs in this S&P 500 universe over the last 10 years. And I think that increase in minority CEOs it's a single-digit increase for the same time period. Yet, as we discussed, that preference for the C-suite experience in the boardroom is, it's paramount. Are we always going to be tapping out on diversity if we keep on focusing on C-suite, or do we still have to widen the aperture for these board searches?
Well, I think the first thing is, not every board seat has to be held by somebody who's a CEO or a CFO. So I think if you are, if you're a board thinking about what is it we need in this room based on the conversations we are having or going to have, you're not going to say we need 100% CEOs. So I think, but you're going to want one or two of them for sure, and one or two financial people. But for the other seats, being thoughtful about what it is that would be useful. And that's where you get that's where you'll get more diversity. If you're a board and you say everybody has to be a CEO and I want 3 women, it's not going to happen. But you don't need that. So I think being thoughtful and looking in other places for good directors is what you need to do. But that's what you need to do. Like, as I said, you can't have a room full of CEOs. They aren't there. So it's trying to think about, is it technology? Is it digital? That's been a huge thing, digital marketing. For the past couple of years, there's obviously a lot of women in that and diverse candidates, less so in technology. But I mean, so you just need to open up and think about, based on the conversations we're going to have, what are the kinds of people we need to have in the room? And as long as you don't like just say it has to be a CEO, you're going to have more diversity.
And do you have insight from away in other areas of Spencer Stuart on what it's like trying to get more equity in the C-suite? It just seems so, it seems so slow relative to even what's happened in the boardroom. You know, it's a little sobering.
It is sobering. I would agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think we have made more progress in the boardroom, but I would tell you, I think it's easier in the boardroom. You know, you got 10 people, very easy to count, you know, to look at it and say, you know, there's one woman, there's one. I mean, you know, it's easy and it's easy to control. So I think, and it took forever to make progress in the boardroom. You know, it's really only in the last 5 years that we've really made progress. I mean, I'll say 10 years, but not really. And so it is depressing about, you know, kind of watching where we are in many other areas. And, you know, as I said in the beginning, if you do the math, you can see how long ago I graduated with a Wharton MBA. You know, if you had asked us back then, would we be sitting in this situation today? We would have been stunned, you know, that progress had been so slow. So I think it's been faster in the boardroom because I honestly just think it's easier. So it's, you know, this is not the harder topic is to address what's going on in corporate, you know, within corporations.
Right. Let's talk away from the survey. What are there qualities or experiences that you think make directors, independent directors, the most impactful in a positive way? You know, is it certain professional experiences? We've talked about C-suite experience, or is it soft skills, EQ? Wondering, you know, what you think of as, you know, the traits of a highly effective board member.
So it is both, right? I mean, you have to have had some experience that you can draw upon and contribute to the room. But there are a lot of softer skills that make a good director. Somebody just put something in the chat about asking different kinds of questions. So the first thing that, you know, you have to learn as a director in a way is that you don't make speeches. It's not your job to tell everybody what to do. Your job is to try to elicit conversation that heads in the right direction. So asking good questions is one of the most important thing that a director can do. So instead of pontificating, it's kind of asking something that makes everybody think about something in a different way. You need to be strategic. Your job is not to worry about the details underneath. Your job is to be thinking at this level, not this like level. So you need to be strategic. They are not looking at you to design their marketing program, right? They have that. So it's being strategic. It's being, you know, understanding your room of equals. So it's being respectful of the people around you, that you think about if there are 10 people in this room, I should not speak more than 10% of the time, right? I should pick my moments and, you know, speak when I really have a great question or I really have something to say. So that's important. And I think the ability to listen to others is really important and to come to consensus. A board is a group of equals making decisions. So, you know, you don't get to say it's my way or the highway. It's like, so the qualities are different for a good director or, you know, than they are necessarily for a good manager. And a lot of your jobs haven't been like that. So these are skills that you need to, you know, some you might have. The ability to listen is something, you know, that you'd get in other things. But sometimes when you join a board, you need to learn what it means to be a good director and kind of hone some of that by watching people who are in the room who are good, because there are people who are really good directors and it has nothing to do with their resume. It's just kind of how they can move a conversation, how they can elicit, you know, consensus. It's a very different job.
So with your recruiting hat on and in the recruiting function, these soft skills, EQ, ability to listen, ability to kind of facilitate a meaningful discussion. How do you measure that?
It's really hard in that, at this point in our lives, all of us should be pretty good at interviewing. So, if you're being assessed by an hour and a half interview, it's harder to get at some of that. Same is true. Like when you interview for a board, and we can talk about it later, but it's like if you're interviewing for a job, think of all the interviews you go through, right? When you're interviewing for a board, you might meet with the committee and the CEO. You might have 2 interviews. I mean, some boards will divide it up and you might have 4, but you're not interviewed a lot. So the way that people can get at who and what you are is by referencing. And that's really what we have to do, is to talk to people who've either been on a board with you. That's the best thing we can do, to find out what kind of director you are. And if not, if you've never been on a board, trying to talk to people, maybe your CEO, but then also people who are at your level, because again, it's this influencing skills that are important, and not how you manage. So references are huge for us.
Good to know. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'd like, if you have a question for Julie, please put it on the chat so we can have a look, and then we'll ask it from there. So go ahead and put it on the chat if you have anything. We also have some questions that people have entered beforehand. So the last question from me is, can you share with us what your most challenging assignment, or what's been sort of most difficult, and any anecdotes that might be useful or instrumental for us?
Probably the hardest searches we have are public companies where the CEO is the founder. Those are hard because they may have peppered their board with friends over the years, and it may not be the best board. And usually we don't get to work in those until an activist has come in to tell them that they might want to change their board. So those are difficult because again, they haven't necessarily looked for directors who are right for that industry, that stage of development or whatever. So those are hard. I think that if you're a director joining a board, you look around at who are the other people, and because someday something's going to happen, and these are the people you're going to be like in survival mode with or something, right? And so it's hard if it's not a great group of people. If it's a candidate who's really good and they can pick and choose, they're going to want to pick a board that they look around the table and say, I'm going to learn from these people. And this is going to help my own development. And so, kind of when you have a board that is obviously not the right board for this period of time in the company, those are probably the hardest. We don't work with activists. We work on the other side of activists. But activists are pretty good now at looking at boards and saying, well, that is not the right group and this is a weakness that we can take advantage of. And that's happening a lot now.
Great. One more quick question, actually. So, we've talked a little bit about Wharton alumni for boards, and we really want to put Wharton alums on the map in terms of corporate governance. It's a great, talented community, but I think we're behind where we should be. Do you have advice for us as the Wharton alumni community about, in general, what should we be doing to increase our presence in corporate governance circles and to highlight, this pretty talented group of people here?
Well, I think one thing is to understand who in the alumni base actually has really good backgrounds for boards, right? You know, this is a hard thing because boards don't tend to say, you know, let's go to the Wharton alumni directory or the Harvard alumni directory, you know, and look for people with certain credentials. They just don't do that. They talk to their own network of people. They talk to sometimes recruiters. There is no easy answer to this. And I think one thing is, you know, for me as a recruiter, you know, we do go to occasionally, we'll go to alumni organizations or groups that have been set up to help people get on boards. We don't do it a lot because, frankly, you know, if I say I am looking for somebody who's 5'6" and has purple hair, and, you know, please send me anybody in, you know, in your group who looks like that, and you're sending me 6 foot tall people with green hair, I can't help. And then I think, well, you know what, you know, that wasn't very useful, so I'm not going to do that again. And so I think that it is being really respectful if you do have people who come to the alumni network to look for people to really listen to them and say, you know, a lot of our alumni might be really good on that board, but that isn't what they're looking for. They're looking for that 5'6" purple haired person. So I know that's not great, but I mean, I think that's one thing to be an alumni group that really is responsive to people who come to you.
Great. Thanks for that. I'm going to now turn to some questions from some of our colleagues on the call. Let me start first with Edmund Green. Edmund runs an organization called Board Harbor. Edmund, are you there? Are you able to unmute to ask your question, please? Let's see if we could get him. Try to unmute him.
Yes, Melinda, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, and Edmund, if I
Hi.
can remind you to tell us just where you're calling from and at least your class, so Julie can get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, I'm calling from DC, class of 01.
Okay, go ahead.
And yes, great. Thank you. Julie, one question I had is, from your vantage point, working in the board governance arena all these years, can you provide some perspective on the importance of trusted relationships in terms of landing and ultimately being successful on a corporate board?
Probably not. That's probably the best way you get on a corporate board is because of a trusted relationship you have from somebody who's either in the room or, you know, works with them, whether it's their, you know, law firm or accounting firm or that. So, you know, this is a world of personal recommendations, even if it's from a search firm, right? It is not always if it's from a search firm, but so trusted relationships are really key to this group of people who are, I don't want to say closed because I don't mean it like that, but just, you know, who aren't going to advertise that they're looking for somebody. So they are going to reach out to their community of people they trust to see if there's anybody those people trust. So it's really important.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, let's, Ozge, are you still online? Are you able to unmute and ask your question, please? Let's see. Ozge? Okay, I'll ask for her. Are you there? Okay, so Ozge asks, what does the experience look like if you were brought onto the board through an activist investor? I know you said you don't do activist works.
Yeah.
But if you have a couple of comments about what.
Yeah, no, I can, because I work on the other side, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the fact is that one of the things we've seen, a couple things. One, depends on the activist investor. And a lot of the activists have been very thoughtful about the directors that they are putting forward. So they are individuals who are independent of the activist firm who have relevant experience. So if it's a pharmaceutical company, there's somebody who came out of the pharma industry or whatever it might be. So, again, that's not all of them, but a lot of the activists have really been good about putting forward independent directors. And those people get in the room and they don't report to the activists. That's not their job. They're a board member. They're not, and so the activists are assuming that because that person has relevant experience and they either know them and know how they operate, but they are expecting them to be a good director, not somebody who reports back to them. So I think it takes a few meetings before the board recognizes that this is somebody who just wants to be a good director, hopefully. And then they become a director like everybody else. But then there are some activists who are looking to put in flamethrowers or whatever. So that's different. So it's hard to generalize, but it has morphed as many of the activists have been very thoughtful about who they add.
Great. Let's go next to Lamar Brown. Lamar, can you unmute, please? And let us know your class, location, and go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm class of 2000. And Julie, I had a question for you about those of us who have been on a board previously, and now we're looking for that second board position. For me, I was on a board. It was a private company board. It was sold to a public company, and they didn't need anyone except our audit committee financial expert. So when we're in the situation of trying to get on the next board, do you have any recommendations? I've heard things like take out some of the details in your LinkedIn, but I wanted to hear from you.
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that this is it's about networking. I don't mean it in the old way of, but I just, you're getting on another board is going to come because somebody's going to recommend you. That is 100% of the time because of the way boards bring people in. They don't publish. They don't go on LinkedIn and say, we're looking for a blah, blah, right? It is a closed process. You need to be introduced into that process. You need an advocate in that room. Somebody has to raise your name. So it could be a director, it could be a lawyer, it could be somebody's next door neighbor, it could be a search firm. So you need to tell people that you're interested in a board seat, what you bring, and what you're interested in. And you need to be able to really think about that. Like, there are people who are really good at private companies. There are people who want to do a PE-backed board. There are people who want to do something in the, pick an industry. You need to know what it is that where you would add value and how you can articulate that to somebody so they can articulate it to someone else. And that's hard. So you don't know where that link is going to be. It could be you serve on a nonprofit board with somebody who's on a for-profit board and says, you know what, she was awesome, and does that. It is, you have to be recommended. So it's really hard to figure that out.
And for those of you who don't know, Lamar is an energy expert and we'll do other networking sessions and you'll have an opportunity to meet her. But just if anyone has an energy board seat in mind, she'd be a great candidate. Let's go next to Linda Drabick. Linda, can you unmute yourself, tell us your class location and ask your question, please?
Great, thanks. Thanks for your comments, Julie. So Linda Drabick, based in the San Francisco Bay Area, Wharton class of 07. So my question is, what are the trends that you're seeing in AI experts moving into board service? I keep hearing in all of these different board communities, we need folks with AI experience. And I have that across many contexts. So I feel like that would be helpful to bring all those contexts into the boardroom. But I'm curious, the adoption of folks like myself, what you're seeing.
It's a hard question. And I think, when you ask it in a year, it'll be different. When you ask it in 2 years, it'll be different. So right now, I think most boards would say we don't need an AI expert. We only have one seat every 3 years. We can't devote it necessarily to somebody who's got a specialty, even though that may be really important. So they'll say, well, we really want a technologist who's been at the top of a company where AI reports in or where cyber reports in or what have you, but we need somebody who's, broader than that. So boards don't tend to like to bring in somebody who's a expert on one thing, right? So, but if you're an energy company, back to Lamar, you do need people who understand energy. AI is, going to be one of those things that right now people are kind of waiting and seeing, and what that means to them. But generally, they're looking for broader experience in technology and hoping that that person will also be or become an AI resource to the board.
That's helpful advice. So obviously, as a candidate, I could reflect much more broad experience than just that one thing. And I
Yeah,
just wasn't sure if it
absolutely.
was following the trajectory of cyber experts, where there was a time where it was like, oh, that those folks need a board seat, versus now it's more across the board. So thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely go broad, but make sure that you highlight the fact that you have it and that your experience is evolving all the time, that you're staying current in it. That is the most for you, for somebody who has that background. That's the most important thing. They don't want to see that you knew it and then you retired.
Yeah.
You have to be staying current.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to Sharon McCarthy. Please unmute and tell us, your year, where you're from, and ask your question, please.
Hi, I'm Sharon McCarthy, class of 89. I'm in Seattle. And my question is this: if you had to think about board members that really made a difference, so we can almost form a mental picture in our mind of what that might look like, who were they? And you don't have to name names, and how did they make the difference? What were the behaviors that really made a difference and how that affected the organization?
Some of this will be a little repetitive, I think, but I think their ego is in track. They want to do what's right for the organization. They want to do what's right for this group. They're strategic. They stay at the top level. They're respectful of the people around them. They know when to talk. They stay current. I mean, those are all kind of things. They're big picture thinkers. And their intention is to help the company and help the CEO.
Great. Super. Thank you.
Sure. Hard to figure out.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, let's go next to Dimple Sani. Dimple, can you unmute, tell us where you're from, your year, and ask your question, please?
Hi, Julie. My name is Dimple Sani. I'm based in Amsterdam, so it's evening time for me, class of 2005, and I'm in the impact investing space. So my question is, what are you seeing in terms of the appetite for ESG and sustainability skills or experience in some of your searches?
So I think there's two answers for this. I think since you're in Europe, the answer will be different for you. I can say in the US, I don't want to say none, but it's close to none. It's a bad topic right now. So 2 years ago when we did our survey, board said put ESG up towards the top. It wasn't the number one, but it was close to it. And now it doesn't appear in the top 10. So I think boards are very nervous, because of the political environment to do that. And also, as I said, it's just, this comes down to there are not a lot of openings. So is that the most important thing? If you are an energy company, it might be very important, but if you're most companies, it will not be on the top of your list. I think that's very different in Europe. I'm not qualified really to talk about that, but I know there's just still much more of an interest on European companies on that. And again, because they have more turnover, they have more leeway to bring in people who are who bring something today, and you're not thinking about having them for 30 years.
Great.
Thank you.
One more question. Let's go to Karen K. Karen, can you unmute, give us your location and year, and ask your question, please?
Sure. And I apologize because I'm actually driving, but I'm Karen. I graduated in 95 and my location is in northern New Jersey. So thank you for all your valuable information. My question has to do with the various board groups like EWAB, Athena Alliance, the list goes on, board prospects, who are all out there and charge, various fees. And I've been assessing many of them. And just from a recruiter standpoint, I'm trying to understand how you feel about these groups and whether you leverage them for board candidates and your overall, POV on these different groups.
So I think it depends on why you're joining them. I think, for example, EWAB seems like a great organization in terms of really delivering information. They synthesize what, articles that have come out, conferences, and they disseminate that. So for people, on a board, it's a great way of staying informed. That's what it seems like to me, right? I'm not allowed to be a member because I'm a recruiter, even though I'm on a board. But that's what I would say. Their purpose is really more being a network of people, women who are in the boardroom and making them, better at what they do. Some of the others are more tuned to getting people on boards. And search firms don't tend to work with them, because, as I said, we don't really find that it's, generally we have a good network. Doesn't mean we know everybody, but so we don't tend to work with them because I think most people's experience hasn't been that they get exactly, they get it and they're sending you 4 people who are really qualified. And they charge you money for it. And I think there are some of them who have really good intentions and are trying really hard to do a good job. And some of them, I think, are taking money from people. So there's so many of them out there now. So you need to really think about what your purpose is. What is it you want to get out of it? And is this the one organization? And it is, there are differences, and they are, it's hard to generalize, but I would be generally questioning.
Great. Well,
yeah, that's great. Thank you for that transparency.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to people, on our Wharton Alumni for Boards website, we do candid reviews of some of these organizations because we don't want people to waste their money on something that might not be a good fit. So always feel free to ask. I want to thank Julie so much. It's been really, really fascinating. And congrats on your incredible career. And glad to hear Wharton was formative for you. And we really applaud the work you've done to build professionalism in the board space. And we hope to see you again on future calls.
Thank you very much. That's very nice. Thank you all.
Yes, let me echo that, Julie. I know that we had talked about you coming also to Reunion, where we usually have a showcase for individuals like you to speak to a larger audience. We usually have 400 or more people at each of the sessions we've run on governance at those events. But I also want to thank you for your transparency. We've had many of these calls, and I think you've been, so resourceful and knowledgeable, but also you come across as quite transparent. And kudos to Melinda for working the report and having some, pointed, prepared questions. So really great call to both of you. And, we hope the elections in the US go well. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Melinda. Great call today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll distribute materials via email to everyone because it's a great report. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you.